Hi, my name is Paul Hilsen, managing partner at Elko. I'm doing a podcast series where we go out and interview leaders in different sectors of technology in order to gather their insights. On the show today, UI and UX designs and what's the difference between a mediocre and a great design. We're going to go through three acts on the show. One is design frameworks and how would you maybe think about designs. Act two is we're going to look at some specific case studies, maybe specific designs and what they did well, maybe what they did not so well. And Act three is, I'm really excited for this one. We're going to do an activity where we watch designs live, and we're going to have our expert designer walk us through what he's thinking as he makes a design for us. On the show today is Ken Krutsch. He's the founder of the Minneapolis-based design firm Krutsch. Ken, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Really excited for this one. So before we get started here, tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be not only a designer, but how you came to own a respected design firm.
So I got started quite a while ago doing as a software engineer. It's my background is in math and computer science, and I was working as a programmer. And I mean, to make a long story short, I got involved early on. Got some mentoring, if you will, from a software developer who was really good kind of in the UI space. And I worked on a really interesting machine vision project. And I just sort of, I had an eye for it. It's like I had this, it was like a natural progression for me to go from, building device drivers, right, to building user interfaces. And then I had kind of a fork in the road project where I worked with someone who had come out of Microsoft, who had been one of the early visual design leads at Microsoft back in the early days of Windows 95. And she really kind of taught me kind of the key principles of user research and user design before really anybody was saying things like user experience and whatnot. And it just kind of progressed from there. And then I did some time kind of as a senior manager for a mid-sized tech company. And then I got out of that and decided to open a design agency. And well, that was 11 years ago. And here I am.
Here now. So it sounds like you're saying that for design, some people have it, some people don't, and you have it.
Well, I don't know if I have it, but I do think it is definitely something that can be learned. But I think, I've seen people who I'll just say have an eye for it, and then people who don't. And there is a little part of it, which is there's some natural ability, which comes to do it. And then I think that there are experiences that you have along the way that teach you things, right? And just, there are these sort of turning points in our careers where big projects or meaningful projects, can kind of steer you into different directions, and just through a variety of, I don't know, luck, I guess. I mean, I had some really key mentors throughout in my career that sort of put me on this path. And yeah.
Awesome. So now you've been in this industry for quite a while, and you've probably seen quite a few changes. What's something that's exciting you that's coming out, or maybe just came out in the UI UX world?
I think the coolest thing that I've seen recently that's interesting is augmented reality. And I know that AR is not necessarily new, but I mean, it's relatively new. But what is cool about it is there have been some technology shifts that have happened. In particular, Apple seems to have gone all in on it. And now that, these phones have multiple cameras on there and LiDAR sensors, they can do amazing depth of field analysis in real time. And we just launched a product for a client of ours that they called Get Like Me. And the idea of it is that you could basically do depth field analysis and image capture and build, it's like motion capture, if you will, but without the mocap suit and the green screen. So we can take, we call them the actor, a human being that's standing in the frame of the phone. And then we can superimpose a skeleton over them. And then with that skeleton, we can wrap high fidelity custom illustrated 3D models over it. So you can have a character dancing next to you or in place of you that, looks like a Black Panther or soldier or whatever it'll be. And it was, the guys that contracted us to do it, had a particular marketing goal in mind. But even just a couple of years ago, building something like that would have really taken a big, very experienced team. But now a lot of the hard work is all built into the phones. And so I think AR is going to be as big a shift in what's happening in the mobile app space as, say, for example, facial recognition was with things like security and whatnot. And I think you're going to see a tidal wave of really interesting ideas come out in the AR space for like retail and online shopping and stuff like that.
Okay, sounds like I'm going to book you for another podcast just to talk about that AR experience, because that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
But we have a lot to talk about. So let's jump into our first act. Act one is design frameworks. So now when I am developing a product software, there are certain development frameworks I can use, test-driven development. There's even how do I go about managing the product? There's the agile kind of framework. So I guess my question is, are there any design frameworks? And if so, what are those?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, that's very much a developer's perspective, if you will. I mean, I spent 20 years as a software engineer, and frameworks were always big. I mean, one of the last large projects, commercial projects I did when I was still, writing code was using Windows presentation framework, if you remember that. And the programming world really is all about frameworks, right? I mean, even today, if you're doing things on the web, you might say, well, we're going to use Bootstrap for presentation and layout, and we're going to use, jQuery or whatever to communicate with the backend, and those are frameworks. There are people who have tried to establish some frameworks in the UX world. When I look at them, they all to me look like they say exactly the same thing. It's just variations on the same concept. I have this presentation I've given for years on the principles of usability. And there's one that I've seen on the internet, which sort of, the hierarchy of user experience needs. I mean, it's a ripoff of Maslow's hierarchy, right? And they start at the bottom with, site availability, right? If the website is down, it's not super usable, right? And then it kind of works up all the way to the very top, which is, desirability. Well, when we talk to, clients or development teams about principles of usability, I have these sort of 6 principles, and the first 2 are really sort of functionally correct and error tolerant, which is a lot like site availability. In other words, you're building a product. Is it really solving a need for someone that matters? And if it's not, the rest of it, in my opinion, just sort of doesn't matter a whole lot. And then error tolerance is kind of a corollary to that. It's like, does the applications that aren't real error tolerant don't support, exploration and comfort and whatnot. And so people get nervous or they don't like it, and then it kind of breaks down from there. Then you have these sort of, these 3 principles that are in the middle that are sort of like 3 axes, if you will. There's like an X, Y, and a Z axis, and they're kind of like, how easy is it to learn? How easy is it to remember? And how efficient is it? And applications usually, and they're sort of conflicting, right? Something that necessarily is very easy to learn is not necessarily efficient, or something that has good recallability, whatnot. So I'll give you an example, right? We designed a very successful storage area networking set of dashboards for a particular product. And we found out that the users who are using this maybe use it once a month, right? They go in, create volumes or whatever it is they're going to do. And so recall was, sort of the design, a big design focus. In other words, efficiency mattered less, but recall was really important. So they didn't have to go back to the manual, that kind of thing. And at the very bottom of this whole principles of usability is subjectively pleasing. And I tell people that if you don't get these other things right, then the sort of the visual design language and those little nuances and touches and whatnot get missed, because people are so frustrated with the application that they don't really care if it's pretty, right? So, but the subjectively pleasing is super important. It's kind of like, like the last 10% of the software project takes 90% of the time or whatever. It's really, crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's and really making something elegant and seamless and whatnot. So there are a lot of different ways to spin that. But when I look at efforts on the internet to create, UX frameworks, to everyone I've seen is some variation of what I just went through.
So it's not so much a framework, but maybe you think about these pillars, would you say, of design and
Principles.
principles.
Yeah.
Can you list those off one more time for us? Just what were each of the principles?
Sure. So functionally correct,
Mm-hmm.
error tolerant, and then ease of use. Oh, not, I'm sorry, efficiency, ease of recall, learnability, that's a word, and then subjectively pleasing.
Got it. Okay. And I'm assuming as we go through some of these examples in a little bit, are those going to be topics that you cover with?
They can be, sure. Yeah.
I think that'd be excellent. So that's really interesting, those principles. Anything else with how you think about design, or even maybe what makes for a great designer as compared to a mediocre designer?
Well, a great designer versus a mediocre designer, I don't know. I will tell you that
probably.
Yeah, it is very subjective. I will tell you that so Ernest Hemingway is very famous for saying that writing is rewriting. And then, Michael Crichton, being Michael Crichton, had a variation on that, which is really long-winded. But basically, writing is rewriting. And I would say that I would apply the same principle. A great UX designer understands that writing is rewriting. You're never done. And you can always take the time and effort to make something a little easier to use. You can always do a little bit more to remove some friction. I would say the biggest thing that I look for in someone in terms of UX designer is their willingness to admit that no matter how hard they try, and no matter how much experience they have, and no matter how close one project is to the 500 they've done before, they're probably not going to get it right the first time, maybe not completely. And to be willing to admit that only through empirical discovery are they really going to understand the nuances of this particular system and how to make it better. So rather, what I tell people when we go through a design phase, it's not about, we have all this experience and we're going to go into a cave with all our Post-it notes and our transparent whiteboards, and we're going to come out with the magic, workflow.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to get to a starting point that'll probably be ahead of what most people would do, because we do this for a living and we've seen a lot. But at the end of the day, I can just tell you, I've never worked on a project in my life, where we did all this design work and got a version of it running and then tested it with real users and went, wow, it's perfect. Usually it's, man, I really thought that people were going to struggle with this part over here, and yet they're struggling on this part over here. It's like, surprise. So what you learn to do is you learn to be really observant, and put the ego away, if you will, and be willing to observe in an objective sort of way, like what's working and what isn't, and then take creative steps to correct that. Let me give you an example. We worked on this project that had to do with paid two-way video chat. Imagine like a celebrity talking to a fan or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we did all of this. We did a pretty lengthy user study up front on both sides, the fans and the celebrities. We did, prototyping and mock-ups, and sort of, we really did the process, right? And then we sort of got, the first version of it up, got into the field, and then we discovered that there was a segment of the user population that really was not familiar with using tools like Zoom, which is what we're on now, or GoToMeeting and stuff like that. And there's this paradigm of using Zoom where there's a meeting and then the people on the outside join the meeting, right? You know what I mean? It's not like, And we had some users on this video app that were thinking of it more like a telephone, where they're sitting in their chair watching TV and the phone is sitting next to them and they're waiting for it to ring. And when we had this and we saw it right away, right? But when we had this realization that, man, that's a mindset of waiting for the phone to ring that a lot of us just had kind of forgotten about, right? Because we're so used to joining meetings and participating in a conference mode rather than in a telephone mode. Anyway, that was kind of a surprise. And, great designers, don't get beat up by that, right? They just sort of go, okay, that happened.
Hmm.
And then they're able to kind of realize it, take a step back and say, how can we, rather than trying to say to the end user, hey, you're like when Steve Jobs famously said, you're holding it wrong. If you remember that whole antenna thing years ago, rather than telling the users that they're holding it wrong, you can take a step back and say, oh, all right, what can we do to alleviate this without basically um, destroying the design for the other 80% of the people. And to really be able to do that, one of the most important characteristics for a good UX designer is to be a really good listener. I wrote this blog post a couple of years ago or 3 years ago about how good UX designers are like great salespeople. And if you've ever gone out on sales calls with people who are just really like top tier salespeople, you notice that they listen more than others. I mean, really, they're really good listeners. They're very good observers, and they're very good at hearing what the prospect is saying, even though the prospect might not really understand what they are looking for or what their own problem is. You know what I mean? And so they're good at kind of understanding what's happening, taking what the prospect is saying in conjunction with kind of the bigger picture. And that's a really super important ability that a UX designer has to have.
I always tell our product managers and some of our developers and designers that there are no truths inside the office walls, right? For you to know what's going on, this product needs to be out there in the real world. You need to be interacting with real people about this. That's where you get to what's going to be the best possible product that you can deliver to someone. You and I could spend 2 years going into that cave, right? And saying this is going to be the perfect product, but someone who is able to release a product in 2 or 3 months, even if it's not super ideal, but get that user feedback, is way ahead of us in 3, 4, 5 months time than we would be even with 2 years of planning in that cave. In my mind, would
We,
you agree with that?
yeah, we completely. We have a saying internally at Krutsch where we tell clients that we're here to help you replace I think with we've observed.
Hmm.
So when you're having kind of design meetings or planning meetings, whenever somebody says, well, I think, and in particular, it's usually, I think users will want this, or I think the customer will want that. We try to get people to change their reference from what I think to what we've observed. It's like we've gone out and we've done user testing and we've done customer interviews and we've observed how they're operating in the field. And what we have observed is, blah, blah, blah. And once you get that mindset working in a design team, it's great. It's a great thing because it takes a lot of the defensiveness and sort of posturing and ego out of the team, and it really becomes, hey, this is what we've empirically observed. And it gives people permission to say, I don't know, right? As soon as
Right.
you get rid of, I think, people are then willing to say, we haven't run a test like that, or we've not observed anyone using this part of the product, and we really don't know. And maybe that's something we need to get the answer to before we move forward.
I love that because that reminds me of a client meeting I had, I think a few months ago, where we're in a big room, and I'm not a designer. That is not something that I will say that I do well. In fact, I know I do it poorly. But we were talking in circles, so I decided, hey, let's just draw this on the board real quick. What is this screen going to look like? And because of my sloppy drawing, I made uh, some streaks and some extra marks in the places that I didn't intend to. And the client went up and started kind of playing around with it, clicking, yeah, this works here, this works here. And one of the smudge marks, he goes, what is that supposed to do? And instead of me saying, oh, that was a mistake, I went, what do you think it's supposed to do? And he's like, oh, well, yeah, I was really hoping I could click this and then this would pop up with this menu option where the user can now go here. And that spurred a whole new conversation of like a huge critical component of the project.
Yeah.
So just instead of me telling the clients, here's what this is, it's that listening, it's observing. You tell us, and let's learn from your expertise here. So That's great. Um, well, we're kind of getting to the end of Act One here. Is there anything else, any other thoughts that we haven't covered?
Well, I would say, you had asked like what's the difference between
Yes.
well, I don't know if you said good or mediocre or whatever, and a great designer, but I also tell people that it really is kind of a UX design is a team sport. It really does take a combination of, psychology and technology and graphic design and sales. Sales is a big part of UX design, and I say that people that can do all of those things are unicorns. They don't really exist. So I learned early on not to try to do this stuff on my own. And I've always partnered with, today it's great. I have people working here that help with these different facets. But if somebody is doing this inside of a company and they're kind of being asked to do it alone, do understand what your strengths are and where you need help and go get help, right? Particularly on the like visual design piece. I mean, someone who isn't trained, for example, has a background in graphic design or whatnot. I mean, that really puts you at a disadvantage doing that part of the job.
Yeah, really good points. And I guess to feel free to pitch yourself a little bit here. Why do people come to you, Ken? Why wouldn't I go to why wouldn't have a single person who's done a few apps do the design and the app developments? That's one person who's going to take care of everything. Why should I come to you to do this front end work?
Well, I guess it depends on what you're building. So what we don't really do websites, for example. We really do more applications, whether they're mobile or web-based. And I think what separates us from your typical agency is this notion we have of inventive design. And we tell, one of our taglines is we do inventive design. And what we mean by that is, we've had 15 US patents issued on behalf of our clients over the last decade, with another half dozen that are in the pipeline. And people do come to us with difficult problems to solve. And we are unique, I think, in that we start the UX design process from, feature, function, and whatnot. We don't start by drawing wireframes and working on your logo. And so when clients come to us, they're really trying to do something innovative and special. And they may have a really great idea, but they're not really sure how to get it, kind of rolling down the runway. And that is, I think, really where we're better at it than most. And our patent portfolio, I think, backs up that claim.
Love it. Well, I think that gives us the perfect segue into Act Two. Now that we've kind of had a bit of a background and how do we think about design? I think you have some specific designs that you're ready to share your screen and kind of talk through some specifics of what works well, what potentially you would do differently if you had the choice. Is that ready for that part?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Act
Let's see.
Two. Ken leads us through some examples and gives us insights into designs.
Well, okay. I haven't rehearsed this, so we'll see.
Makes it all the better.
Yeah, right. We'll see what we can come up with. All right, so let me share my screen here. Let's see, maybe I'll just start by just sharing the browser window. And we'll get rid of the...
All right, I recognize this a bit.
Yeah, right. So I'll just show you a couple of examples where, we had some that were interesting. This one, this is a product called Don't. And it was fun coming up with a name for that. But a couple of guys came to us and wanted to do basically address safer teen driving. And their whole, actually, we even did their site photo, if I can just find that real quick, did like a promo site. And their whole sort of proposition was that, distracted driving is the #1 killer of American teens. Don't let your teen drive with distractions, okay? And so we kind of put up a promo site and put the app on there and whatnot and did all this stuff. And when we started the project, they had this kind of picture in their head of, listen, we're going to build an app that will block phone calls. I mean, that's kind of what it came down to. We're going to block phone calls. We're going to not let you read and respond to text messages, and et cetera, et cetera. And kind of getting back to this sort of technology focused version of our design, I said, I don't know if you're going to be able to do that, because I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm more worried about getting it through the App Store review process. Apple and Google typically are very reluctant to allow you to interfere with the normal functioning of a phone, even if it's for a good cause. And we said, what if we looked at this from a different perspective? And it was kind of like, rather than blocking calls, what if instead we separated this into two apps, and we have an app for the parent and an app for the teenage driver? We call it the child, even though they're not really, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And I said, our design focus should be around trust but verify. So again, rather than having this heavy-handed draconian piece of software that's going to, block your phone from working while you're driving, what if instead we just monitor what you do, report it back to the parent, and then let the parent do the parenting? In other words, how about if we not build an app that tries to be mom, but instead give mom the tools she needs to, do a good job at being mom? Let her know what you're doing in the car when they're not around. And so it was a huge shift for them in terms of their thinking. And there were apps out in the App Store already that we're trying to block calls and doing this other stuff. And some of them had already kind of disappeared, and none of them were really doing very well. And I said, why don't we? So we came up with this idea of reporting rules. Like, what are things that you want to be reported on if your child is operating a vehicle? And then the child has their own version of the app, and then there's this sort of, dashboard experience. And so what we did in terms of designing it is we started first with, this is kind of where we got to, was this notion of a child and a parent dashboard. But before we got there, I said, why don't we have to start first by building some, utility prototypes for the child? Like, what is it we're going to be able to reliably detect and report? And so that's where we started. We built, these sort of dirt simple, utility user interfaces. We deployed them with, for example, TestFlight and Google closed alpha program, so we could push them to phones. And then we basically built a big complicated matrix. We called it the capabilities matrix. What can we detect when our app is not running? In other words, it's in the background. Or what can we do or detect when the phone is running in the foreground? Et cetera, et cetera. And it completely changed the product strategy for them. And then we kind of went into this sort of heavy branding, visual language. We spent a lot of time on, and we ended up with this word "don't," which we liked. It was like, don't answer that phone. Don't, don't, right? And then we came
classic parents. Yeah.
Yeah, I know,
I
right?
remember being told don't a lot as a kid. Yeah.
I know. And it's kind of funny, you go to the App Store and the branding is kind of fun, because literally the name of the app is, don't parent, right? And then there's don't child. And anyway, so we kind of did all this. And we did this really interesting, when we did the final user study. I've done so many user studies now over the last 20 years. I said, we have to recruit a group. We have a very specific demographic. It's like, we need a parent with a teenaged driving child, right? Mm-hmm. And they need to be people we don't know. They had never heard of this thing. And so we contracted with this company called Userlytics. Userlytics is this neat organization that have a huge panel of users worldwide, and you can give them a very complex set of demographic requirements, and they will go out and recruit users. You pay for it. Mm-hmm. And then they have like an app that they run, that your app kind of runs inside of, so that they can, they record the screen, they turn on the selfie cams. I can see what they're running on their screen, what they're tapping on, and I can see their face to read their body language. You can tell right away looking at someone's face when they're, whether do they understand what they're seeing? Do they not understand? Are they frustrated? Blah, blah, blah. And it was eye-opening. It was awesome. And so we went through this whole sort of user study, and we kind of broke it all down. And so that was kind of interesting. And then it was kind of fun. We sort of did all of this, and then the client came back to us and said, hey, we have another idea. And we want to add this function on here that we call don't panic. Well, we came up with the name don't panic, but they wanted a like a panic button. So, you're driving, you get pulled over by a cop, right? And we discovered through our user testing that people, kids in particular, and I'd say kids, I'm talking about like older teenagers, young adults, either have their phone sitting like in some kind of a dash clip so that they can get to Spotify and all that, or they just throw it in the cup holder. And I thought, man, if we just put like a big red button on the top of this thing, sitting in the cup holder, if we turned on the front-facing camera, we would capture everything in the window frame, right between the A pillar and the B pillar of your car, while the cop watches up, and it would give you instant recording and streaming to a parent. So they hit the panic button and it immediately connects them with their parent. And so you get instant two-way video streaming, while the cop is yelling at you for speeding or whatever it will be. And we put some promotional stuff around it. We even built it in so we integrated it with Siri. So you could say, hey, Siri, don't panic, right? And it would go right into this two-way mode. But when I look at kind of, and we just finished filing patents on this. I mean, we literally submitted the filing for this yesterday. So good timing. And
all right.
but this is an example of a client coming up to us with a really lofty idea. I mean, their lofty idea was, this is the number one killer of teens is distracted driving, and let's do something about that. And let's be honest, the current political climate, I mean, there's a lot of discussion right now about, bad police behavior in conjunction with, kids, right? Young kids, young men. And wouldn't it be great if you could just instantly turn on, the equivalent of a body cam for that driver? But getting there was a process, right? I mean, they originally came to us, said, we just want to be able to block the phone. And we turned it into, an interesting sort of technical innovation, if you will.
It's my favorite type of problem where you have a lofty goal and then you have an outcome, but what are the specific actionable items that you can take to achieve that goal, right? You're not going to make an app that is just going to, is just going to save 3,000 teens a year, right? But like, what does that, I guess, what does that mean to, I'll rephrase that. What does that mean to try and help these teens that are distracted, right? How do you take that idea and make that into something that is, you can click buttons and then it actually helps you? That's an awesome story. Thanks, Ken, for sharing that.
Yeah, and it's a great example of not just so much the technical focus, but the emphasis on workflow. I mean, I keep using that word workflow, and I'm hoping that resonates with your viewers. But it really is. I tell people that the key to usability, I mean, it's a multifaceted jewel, right? But some of the really important facets are, workflow, feature set, stuff like that. I mean, is it solving the right problem, and is it doing it in a way that fits a mental model that makes sense to the end user so they can figure out how to use it, that kind of thing. And I feel like we're really good at that. That's the piece that we're really good at, is getting someone, it's like every time, like I would say the last half dozen clients we've worked with have, filed patents on behalf of something we've designed for them, or we filed patents anyway, and it always starts with kind of this lofty idea. They have this idea, like this other person with the two-way video thing and the phone ring. It's like they wanted to connect fans with celebrities in two-way chat, okay? But to go from that idea by itself is not patentable. But to get to something that is intellectual property that they can protect, right? That's a process that we've been very effective at. I mean, I have 15 patents issued, and I have 100% success rate on every patent I've filed has been issued. And it's because we're very good at sort of teasing out the parts of the invention that are interesting, that are protectable, and that really separate your product from what everyone else is doing. And that's what we're good at.
Also gives some hope that, you just filed a patent yesterday or successfully this process yesterday. And for one, congratulations on that. But there is always still more to invent out there, right? There's more to do, right? Sometimes to me it's daunting that it's like, oh, everything's already been invented. If I've thought of it, someone's already not only tried it, but probably has like a whole company with that one idea. So while you have to get maybe more nuanced and specific and think a little harder about it, there are still opportunities out there for you to carve out your unique niche out there.
Oh, I mean, 100%. I mean, look at TikTok. Who saw that coming, right? I mean, who saw this future where, I can't, were they 15-second video, however long they are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who really thought that would have taken off the way it did? Because most people would have said, well, you can already record videos and post them to Instagram. What's the big deal? There is always, I mean, and that's a small example, but another example I think that surprised everyone was Slack. Slack, when it first came out, everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people looked at it and said, so it's a more distracting version of email. What's the big deal? and those of us who were running an agency realized that, man, I mean, I have a bunch of different clients and I need to be able to compartmentalize my, the people that work for me versus the clients and maybe their customers into separate channels, right? Where we can easily share stuff. And this is nothing like email, but not everyone saw it right away. And that thing just sold for, I don't know what, 27 billion or whatever it was. So there is always room for something new. There's always a blue ocean out there, right? There's always an arena where you think it's been saturated and somebody comes up with a unique take on the idea and boom. And Slack's a great example. TikTok's a great example. And yeah, there will never be an end to that kind of innovation because people are greedy and they like to make money. And if they see an opportunity to build something and make a ton of money, people will always keep trying to do it.
And I want to challenge you and put you on the spot here. I'm super curious about these principles that you talked about. And speaking of companies that are potentially worth in the billions, Amazon.com. As long as you're sharing the screen, would you mind going to Amazon.com and maybe just talking about one or two of the principles that just pop out to you as you see that website of
Sure.
what's maybe one or two things that they've done well. And I know I'm putting you on the spot right here and now.
Yeah, that's okay.
Let
me just share an incognito window so you're not like looking at my my.
Oh, you got, yeah. I was trying to go for that. Yeah, got me. All right.
Yeah, let me see what will come up here. All right. So here's Amazon. Yeah, and of course, it would be a different discussion if I were to sign in because, of course, nothing tracks like Amazon. I mean, I can't go to a website now without seeing stuff I've looked at in Amazon, right? Appearing in little, ad bricks around it.
I mean, not even just looked at, but like even like whispered to like a significant other a week ago. Right. It will pop up right now in an ad.
Yeah, so Amazon is interesting. I actually had a discussion about different types of what I'll call catalog traversal with a client once when they were arguing with me about the difference between search and browsing, and I said, well, people do like to search, but they don't always know what they're looking for, right? So I can go in here and say, well, I'm looking, oops, I could spell that right, couldn't I? I'm looking for a coffee maker. And I can hit coffee maker and I get a lot of examples here. And of course, Amazon is really good. They of course promote, like here, sort by featured. So they're gonna push the ones that maybe are bestsellers or ones that, basically are, come with prime shipping, stuff like that. And so this is an example of search, but I think what's interesting about Amazon is there's really two ways to search, right? One way is you say coffee maker, and you get a bunch of coffee makers, and then you start scrolling and clicking and scrolling and clicking. This is what I tend to do. This is me. Like I would go in here and look at this, and maybe I would want to, filter by brand, filter by price, filter by type, that kind of thing. I mean, they have an amazing catalog traversal system. I can get all the way down to, I only want one that does 5 to 8 cups or, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can go crazy. Other people though, will come in here and say coffee maker, 2 cup, like you can see the stuff that's filled in, right? That people have done, like with automatic
Sure, yeah.
shut off, what's a bestseller, travel brewer. So Amazon is sort of tracking what other searches people do, and then they're offering those as options for those kind of searches. So yeah, all right, I want a small French press 2-cup coffee maker, right? And then at some point I get to some products, right? And then from there I can just kind of start clicking and looking around. And Amazon does other kinds of neat things too. Like you'll notice they highlight save $2. I mean, people who are big avid shoppers, right, just cannot resist the $2 coupon. And so if you were to heat map test this, you'd see, I mean, this would like light up. Your eye just goes right to this heavy green. And it's like, ooh, save $2. I can't, resist that. And people will click on that just because they're saving $2, even before they've really kind of dug into like what they're looking for. And so,
can I ask real quick, what would
yeah.
be even this that green highlighted text? What if I can tie this back to the design principles? Does that tie into anything? Is that maybe desirability?
Yeah. So if I were to go back to those design principles and start, this is functionally correct in that I'm in this site to look for a coffee maker, right? And it's error tolerant. I mean, error tolerance, I don't know, like I can type in small French press coffee tube. I could type in just about anything after small French press and I would still get some hits. In other words, Amazon is error tolerant in that it doesn't say, oh, we don't have anything that exactly matches what you're looking for. They're going to give you some, unless I just type, garbage in here. They're going to give you some stuff to look at. And I would consider that error tolerance. Okay. Then after that, you sort of get to the easy to learn, easy to recall, and efficiency. And I would say, this is an example of a site that sort of does all three, interestingly, which is most products will, if you think of it as like a 3-axis, three-dimensional graph, people will tend to emphasize maybe one or two and not all. Getting all three is hard to do. But I would make the case that Amazon really has done all three because this is easy to recall because basically I have a search bar at the top and we've all been trained by Google how to use that. So
I want something, type it in. Yeah.
Yeah. So the recall part of it is there, and the easy to learn, of course, is there. And then efficiency, I don't know how you would make this much more efficient. I mean, I'm sure Amazon spends a great deal of time thinking about that internally, right? They do everything they can to drive people to the products that are going to drive the most revenue from them, whatnot. But at the end of the day, I'm looking at small French press coffee maker 2-cup, and here they are. I mean, that's pretty efficient. And then after that, if I wanted to even go down more, I could say, well, I had it in my mind that, I wanted a clever chef, whatever. And you can click around and you can quickly see your reviews. And away you go. And if you finally get, and just basically with typing in one phrase and one click, I got down to the 3 that they sell. And then I just kind of look at them and go, well, I don't know, this one, I guess they're the same, aren't they? One of them is sponsored. It's 2 of the same. And then I can get 2-cup, 4-cup, pick colors or whatever. I mean, I'm like a lot of Americans. I spend a lot of time on Amazon window shopping. And so I feel like I'm a good user of this app, if you want to call it that. And the subjectively pleasing part, I don't know. At the end of the day, what I want to see is the product, right? I want to see pictures of the product, and there they are. And a lot of, how subjectively pleasing these results are going to depend on the vendor, right? How good of a job did the vendor do, creating product images? Look, here's a video. I can watch a video about how to use a press. And then, of course, there's the famous Amazon patent for one-click buy. I mean, they actually had a patent on that years ago, which was kind of a hubbub, where they kind of invented this notion of there it is, and you hit one button and bam. Right? I mean, that's subjectively pleasing, wouldn't you say? I mean, it's the exact analog of the Pavlovian rat hitting the pellet or hitting the button and getting a pellet. And I have to believe that one-click buy just like sent their sales through the roof. So yeah, I mean, Amazon is at it, and I don't really know what else you can say about that. I mean, it's interesting. You look at that. I would say what's interesting about Amazon, if you look at this, versus looking, I mean, there are some design touches here that are subtle, right? Like if you look at this versus looking, say, at eBay, I mean, eBay just, it's like, you know, they're throwing as much information as they can kind of cram in, but it's annoying to look at. I mean, they're sort of universally regarded as like a, you know, interface design Hall of Shame candidate, but you know, it's not like eBay hasn't been successful. So you could make the case that maybe in that case, subjectively pleasing is more about, look, I just want to see as many things as I can. I have this other, when we give this UX presentation, I will do a comparison between, of course, this always makes people nervous when you bring these up, but this comparison between the Drudge Report, right, and Huffington Post. So they're two of the largest news aggregator sites, really, that aren't tied to, you know, a news network. And Drudge is just a massive pile of links, but you know, it probably has 3 or 4 times the number of views that HuffPo does. But you know, they have an audience, right? And their audience just is looking for just link after link after link after link. And there's like no design style here at all. It's a white page with, you know, some big warning story. Now, if I instead go to HuffPo, the people at Huffington Post put a lot more attention into design, and it's subtle, but they design their site to look more like a news site, right? In that they've got, you know, kind of, you know, like well-defined columns, but look at, you know, just try to ignore the ads here for a minute.
We're still looking at the Drudge Report. Did you?
Oh, sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. Or I mean, I was in the wrong window here.
There we go.
I forgot you couldn't
coming up here. Yeah.
I forgot you couldn't see my whole screen. So here's a case where, I mean, a big ad is going to come up here, but here's a case where, you know, they have like a lead story, and Drudge has a lead story, but it's usually not, it isn't framed like a lead story in the same way that this is, right? They got a line, a big photo, right? Maybe some, you know, and then like latest news, and then there's a column. But look at the difference in white space between the HuffPo version and the links that you can click on, and just the general relatively clean organization of the content on Huffington Post versus Drudge Report, which is just seizure inducing. I mean, it's just, you know, it's just an explosion of links, and then you have all these links down here. I mean, right? And it's designed for a different audience, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I look at this and I don't even know where to start. Like here, it's kind of guiding me from top to bottom, and I know it kind of guides my eye. Whereas here, it's a little bit more of a shotgun approach, right? Of here's everything.
It is, I know, and you know, and it's almost like they have a lead story, but then they have, you know, like more important stories, or maybe stories that are newer. I don't really sure what's going on up here, but then they've got a bunch of, you know, new links, right? Whereas with, you know, Huffington Post, it's very much, you know, there's a definite lead story and it's right here. And then, you know, here are kind of the subordinate, you know, the secondary lead stories or latest news. There's a little picture, but you can look at this site and you can just kind of scan it, right? Because each of the titles are short enough where you can kind of take them in without reading them. Like I can look at this, I can see Canada regulator, Pfizer, COVID-19. I feel like I've read the article already, right? You sort of already know what it's going to say. Whereas when you go into this one, you know, it's just like, ooh, vax allergy warning, anaphylactic reaction. I mean, and I would say that the Drudge links are more clickbaity because they give you less information. You're surrounded by all this other stuff, and you are in some sort of a way, I think, emotionally driven to click on something to kind of get away from this. You know, it's like, I want to read, there's nothing here to read. It's like, I want to read something. It's just, you know, here's a link. What if America isn't special? Well, okay, sure. But there's nothing there to read. Whereas if, again, with the Huffington Post, it's like, you know, Biden vows 100 million vaccinations first 100 days. I don't really even have to click on that link because I've read it. I mean, I've already read the punchline of the story. You know what I mean?
Right. And
so
and Drudge is doing that on, the interesting thing is Drudge is doing that on purpose, right? There's a reason,
right.
they are doing that.
Right. And what's interesting is that I would say this site is more subjectively pleasing in the sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this balance of, I don't know, efficiency and whatnot. But, the Drudge numbers just completely swamp the Huffington Post numbers. So I think people like clickbait. They really do. And they like to be, they like to be teased, if you will, in terms of, like there's just enough information there, inside depth self-made implosion. Well, if you haven't been following, you're like, oh, what's that? Again, as opposed to the Huffington Post stories, which give you enough information where you sort of can draw your own conclusion just reading the headline of what this story is going to be about. Anyway, web design is by itself is a big topic. And there's a huge difference, of course, between Amazon, which is, they're trying to drive your clicks too, but they're trying to get you to buy something. Whereas, Drudge is, they're just trying to get you to just click, because they generate ad revenue from it all. Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, yeah. Thanks for that comparison. Was there something else you wanted to compare and contrast like you did here, or do we want to move on to kind of the live design?
Yeah, I think we can, move on.
Okay. Sounds good. So I hope I'm not putting you on the spot again, but Act 3 is, Ken, you are going to once again share your screen and design something for us on the spot. Is this something that you have an idea of what you want to make? Did you want me to come up with the idea? How do you want to go about doing this?
I don't know if I could do anything. I don't know how much time we have, but I don't know if I could do anything interesting in a 10-minute time period. But what I could do is I could show you some examples of how we started some earlier projects, like maybe that Don't project, and just kind of walk you through that process if that's interesting.
Dealer's choice on this one. I wouldn't mind, because we kind of actually, we can negotiate back and forth here, but we kind of talked a little bit about your design process and what you thought about with the Don't. I think it's okay if it's not interesting, and we can edit this out of the podcast because it's not live. So
sure. So give me an idea.
Sure. So here's what I'm going to do. I actually pulled up a random. I'm going to share my screen myself for a second here. And we'll ignore this first one, but we're gonna click on this until we find an idea that we like. I Googled app idea generator, Google delivered as it always does. So I'm gonna click new idea. Spotify for getting movie recommendations. What are your thoughts on that?
Spotify for getting movie recommendations.
I don't know if I exactly know what that.
I don't know if I know what that means. I mean, of course I use Spotify, so I know what that is, but I don't know.
We're going to roll the dice again. A project planner for cat owners. Are you a cat owner?
I am. Sure, let's do that one.
Okay, we're going to do this one. So as you dive into this, what is the tech stack that you typically use for designing something?
Okay, so let me do this. Okay. So I'll just share let me share my entire screen with you here. Let me just get rid of some stuff. Sorry, I was working on some other stuff and I don't want to have that running before I share my screen here again.
Totally fair.
Okay. Right. My tech stack. Okay. All right. All right, can you see that okay?
I can, yes.
Okay, so believe it or not, we start pretty much every design process with Evernote, and there's nothing magic about Evernote other than it's just text. But Evernote, I like it for note-taking because you can draw in it. We all do have iPads, and we will sometimes just pull out the iPad and quick sketch, especially when people were remote. But I really do, for the most part, start every project with just kind of a text outline on sort of what we're going to do. So, and I'll skip the kind of setup, but what again? Oh God, what was the title?
Project planner for cat owners.
Oops. You know how hard it is to type, and the internet is watching you type.
Oh yeah, it's probably the most
All
difficult
right.
thing you can do.
Yep. So project planner for cat owners. So I would usually start with some kind of, like usually we're not making these up. A client, right, comes to us and says, hey, we have an idea for a project planner for cat owners. All right. So we would start with an abstract, right? Lorem ipsum. I mean, this usually comes from them. They give us some kind of a one pager or a paragraph, or just, I have this idea. We would build some software that would let, me do project planning for my cat. And is that, when you say project planner for cat owners, does that mean, like, are you planning projects or activities for your cat, or things that you need to do to support your cat? Or are you just happen to be a cat owner and you want to build a project planner? I mean, that would like literally be my first question. And so let's say, for example, it was planning activities for my cat. I mean, just to keep it moving along, okay? And so then we would start with, well, what do the high level requirements look like? I mean, what is this? What does it have to do, right? And sometimes people will, if they have trouble with that, I will say, just tell me a story about, like, in your mind, this is all done, right? And the thing that's in your head exists, and you can just use it, and tell me a story about what you do with it, right? Mm-hmm. So, a story about, planning activities for my cat, right? And then that would go on for a while, right? So we would kind of get like this high level, over this story, I'll just call it a requirement story of something they want to do with their cat. And then we would go from there and we would start asking questions. And questions would be kind of things like, what would you need to share? That's one I usually ask quickly. What would you need to share with others? In other words, is there a part of this thing where you're going to create a set of activities for your cat, and maybe you want to share it with other cat owners, right? And or maybe you don't care about that, but that's a really important thing, because as soon as someone says, I want to share it with others, that sort of immediately opens the door to, we're going to need something running in the cloud that we're going to have to connect to, which is right away means creating an account. It means security. Mm-hmm. It means being able to share, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it does. It's like it opens this barn door of stuff that we have to worry about. That augmented reality app that we worked on recently, one of the things we noticed when we finished it and we were kind of playing around with it internally, is I had this realization. It was like, man, I can't remember the last time we built anything where there was no need, that there was basically nothing stored in the cloud, and there was no login. I mean, there was no personal, PII anywhere in the entire app. Basically, you went to the app, you downloaded it, and you just used it. And I remember, we were kind of talking about it and thinking, wow, man, the onboarding is really easy because there isn't any, right? And it was kind of a reminder for all of us that, God, if you can get rid of, onboarding that and everything that goes with that, it makes everything so much easier to use and to adopt and whatnot. And so when they say things like, what would you need to share with others? If they're casual about that, right? Then I would push people into, well, maybe not do that. I mean, why don't you just let them do something and it's all stored locally on their phone and they have fun with it and who cares, right? And we had a similar discussion with another client a while back where they wanted to collect all this information. They were basically building a sales tool. Think of it as like a configurator. You could go into this tool and you could build out a package of something, of service, and you could price it. And when you were done, you could download a PDF with what you had done, right? And then contact sales. And they wanted the users to submit their email and create a password and do all this stuff. And I'm like, that's basically, you're just telling them that you don't want them to finish going through the process. Why don't you just let them play around with the tool and have fun? And when they're done, they sort of will have this feeling of, wow, that was easy. Maybe this is a company I want to work with. You know what I mean? It's kind of that subjectively pleasing aspect, the emotional part. Anyway, so then we would kind of go into, what are example cat tasks? right? Whatever it'll be. I know with my cats, it's all going to be about, feeding, because that's really all they care about. Cleaning their litter box, feeding again. I mean, what else do you do with cats? All right. So you kind of go through all of that, and you ask a bunch of questions to try to figure out. And as you're asking questions, kind of like what I was saying earlier, if you want to share stuff with others, this implies, cloud services, AL, and et cetera, and all the things that go with that. It also implies, login, account management, okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'll just leave it at that for kind of right now. But we go through this process where we want to really understand, like, what is it you're trying to do with this app. Then the next thing we do, and
I'll interject right there real quick, just to say, and the reason this is so important is because you can build anything you want to, right? But how do we make sure we're building the right thing for the client is why this part is so critical to understand up front.
Right. We want to make sure that people have this, this picture in their head, right? One of the things I tell people about usability is the trick to making something usable is to get the user to associate what they're looking at with a mental model with which they're already familiar, right? And as soon as you can do that, the moment you do that, they go, I get it. And I even have this picture. Here, let me show you this picture. So when can you see that okay? So we do this presentation, and I say, of course you can see this over here, so it gives it away, but I show this picture and I ask people, what is that, right? And I get everything from, those look like hot and cold water knobs on a shower, or whatever. And then I flip to the next picture and it puts the holes in it. And I go, now what is it? Oh, salt and pepper shakers. And this is actually from Don Norman's book on living with complexity. And it's like the best example I've ever seen of this notion that people form expectations based on past experiences. And then the faster you can get people into that place where they go, oh, it has 4 wheels, and oh, it's a car, right? Then they stop trying to figure out what it is. Then they go into, okay, now how do I, what's different about this one versus the other one I've seen? But that's like the biggest barrier to cross, is just getting them to look at something and go, oh, okay, that's a project manager. So for this thing, you're talking about a project planner for cat owners. Is this a matter of, is this a calendar, right? Is this just a calendar for your cat, right? In other words, is this, I actually misspelled calendar. I can't do anything. And is this just a calendar that has your cat stuff in it, right? Maybe we just create an account for your cat in your calendar, and then you can add things to it with reminders on when you have to do stuff and da 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 da. And we start that conversation, because maybe what they want to do is something that can already be done with stuff that's already out there. Like, why build a new app? That this can already be done, right? That kind of thing. And so it really gets them, you're trying to get people to take a high level idea, right? Project planner for cat owners, and bring it down to something that's more concrete. Like, is this just a calendar for your cat, or is there more to it than that? And let's say there is more to it than that. And let's say they do want to do a bunch of sharing, and maybe they want their app to recognize their cat's voice and do something with geofencing and who knows what. Then we kind of move into, kind of a more of a feature set and workflow stage. And this is kind of the beginning of the feature set stage, which is, feeding, cleaning litter box, feeding again. And then we'll move into an
I
elementary.
Personally would like, as a feature, to be able to put a GPS tracker on my cat, and as the calendar, see it move around the house all day. So at any moment in time, I can see where it's been in the house and what it does throughout the day. So that would be my ideal planner for cat owners.
Yeah, and as a corollary to that, I would want to see, who dropped that hairball.
There you go. Yeah.
Right.
You can know the location of the hairball and which cat was in that area.
Which cat did it? I mean, I have 2 cats, and I find a hairball, and I'm like, which one of you 2 did it?
There, yeah, love
exactly.
it.
Yeah. So you kind of get into this, and then where experience comes in is when they say, well, yeah, I want to create, I want to track my cat's activity. I want to share it with other cat owners. Where experience comes in is you immediately start saying, that means, a cloud service, that means account management, that means social sharing. That probably also means including, uploading, sharing photos, videos, right? It kind of, you then start thinking about other apps that do similar things and what kinds of features those things have. And then you talk about that. And we very quickly get to a stage where we have to start like mapping out, like, what could this look like, right? And so for that, I like to use this tool that Omnigraphel. It's it's just a diagramming tool. And we spend so much time in this one trying to work out workflow that we, just to make it easier for us, we kind of came up with what we call pattern stencils. These are user interface patterns and techniques that we have used over and over again over the years that work well for mobile apps or desktop web apps, whatnot. And they solve different problems. And I won't take the time to go through all these, but we have them in categories. There's kind of like things for landing pages or things where you're looking at documents. There are nonlinear patterns where you're in one part of the app, and rather than progressing linearly through an app, I want to jump to a completely different part of the app. So that includes things like dashboard tiles, that includes things like navigation, top navigation, et cetera. And it goes on and on and on, data view, feedback, whatever. And so we will literally, we've got like a stencil of these, and, we will start with here, I'll just create a new document. Beach ball. And we will get together and we'll start talking in terms of these data patterns and saying, all right, let me go down to the mobile pattern just to keep this quick. And maybe this thing starts out as a dashboard. So we're going to have a dashboard here, and inside the dashboard, there are tiles that we want to look at that allow us to see different activities. So here's an example of, a separate tile. So maybe there's one tile, two tile, et cetera. And then we'll put little call out blocks in here that, this maybe is the, the feeding tile. This is the, hairball tile. You get the idea. And then these tiles will then lead to, maybe I click on the feeding tile and it takes me to a screen that shows me when they ate last, and we got a bunch of different of these, but maybe it's like an embedded table view. There's one of these for each day, and under each day, I've got a subtable, which is each meal in the day, and what time do they eat, how much do they eat, stuff like that. I mean, I'm making stuff up here, right? But that is kind of what we do. I'm expecting
this app, just so you know, at the end of this.
Yeah, it'll be fun to get through the App Store review process. And so, and then, we take this, but when we did this kind of planning, so one of the biggest feathers in our cap in terms of recent design projects was we spent about 18 months completely redesigning patient registration and tracking for the Mayo Clinic's clinical trial system, which they just rolled out in Q1 this year for the Cancer Center. And we spent months and months just doing this. I mean, we probably had 24 separate diagrams that were huge, that we had a team of business analysts at Mayo where we had to work out kind of the details of like, what information can we display here, what has to be collected, whatever. And we had kind of all these patterns in place, so we could just kind of drag it and say, well, we're going to use a slide out panel for that, because it lets us take one of these data cells and provide a lot of internal detail and whatnot. And we really spend a lot of time in the process. And so when we do this with clients, we get kind of past this initial requirements. This is kind of the feature set and workflow phase. And I'm telling you, this is where in terms of usability, this is really where the magic happens. If you do a good job of getting into this, it's then relatively easy for someone to take drawings like this, diagrams like this, and then build a visual, kind of like a high-level visual language that you use across the app. And then you replicate, these these data types, if you will, or these screens using your established visual language, and the app design just kind of falls out pretty rapidly. I mean, the devil's in the details, right? I mean, and all that. And then from there, we start drawing, high fidelity mockups. And then from here, we would go. So these are kind of our pattern stencils and whatnot. Let me bring up another tool that we're a big fan. I mean, I'm skipping a lot of steps here, but we use this tool called Zeppelin. And we would then go into a phase where we would start drawing wireframes, sketching out visual design comps, if you will, examples of how this could work. And I've got one actually here. Here it is. We kind of jokingly called it ready to wear when we did this a while back, because it was kind of the idea was we're going to build you like custom tailored clothing, but it's off the rack, ready to wear. So these examples here, like this embedded table view, we have like I probably have it in here somewhere. Yeah, right here. And then we do it, draw it up in Zeppelin. We do a lot of the actual illustration in Adobe XD, export it out into Zeppelin. And then if I'm a web developer, I can click on any of these elements and get the corresponding CSS that goes with it. And so the developers go into these, Zeppelin, we call them Zeppelin boards, but whatever their projects, and they just lift the CSS right out of there. This has been one of the most game-changing tools that I've seen come along in a long time, because in the old days, you would maybe draw up some screens in Adobe Photoshop, maybe put them into an Adobe InDesign or a Word document, right? And then you'd PDF it and ship it over to the developers. And they would just kind of, you would get a loose approximation of what you designed, because you're giving them basically the equivalent of a piece of paper and saying, here, go build this. So they do the best they can. But now with tools like this, they are lifting, right, the exact dimensions and, width, height, margin, background color. I'm not getting emails anymore from people going, hey, can I have that logo, saved as as an SVG, and what's the hex, value for that color, and blah, blah, blah. They just go right in here and copy and paste. And Zeppelin lets you, you can do this for iOS, Android, web-based, whatever. And so, this is kind of the tool stack. And then just because I'm not out of breath yet, I'll just take one more minute and tell you that then what we do is the developers will start putting together mock-ups, if you will, of the application that follows our workflow, right? That follows the screen asset design we do. And then we'll throw together like a little Node.js backend server with some canned data, so we can actually throw up screens. And then, the missing piece of the puzzle is we then take those things and go into, where is it? Browser Stack. So then we will fire up Browser Stack. You probably use that. And then we can emulate all the browsers. We can emulate all the devices. Android, like I can go in here and say, I want to test this with iOS, and I want to do it, only on an iPhone 11 Pro. I mean, God, in the old days, and again, by the old days, I mean, not that long ago, your team had to have like a collection of physical devices. Usually you'd have a card table set up somewhere with like a bunch of devices on it, a bunch of different screens. Here's the Windows, Mac, whatever. Now everybody can just do this using Browser Stack. I mean, there are examples where it doesn't, work. And then you can even plug this sort of thing into like a Selenium, where you can then automate each of these, stories that you've outlined in these tools. And away you go. And then just rinse and repeat.
So give us the high level, the 30-second overview from start to end, tech stack, and what you use each one of those for.
Sure. So the beginning is, Evernote, really, where it's we just go in and we, an abstract, give us some stories about how this is going to be used, and we start actually asking a bunch of questions, and from the questions we get out some requirements, right? Then from the requirements we go into feature set / workflow planning, and workflow planning this is basically like a flow diagram, but we actually throw our screen stencils in just because we think this is going to be a dashboard. We think this is going to be a login screen. We think this is going to be a table, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll stay that way, but it's a starting place. And then we map this stuff out. While that's going on, we're maybe putting some mood boards together. We're a big fan of using Miro for that. So put some mood boards together to, give us some different options in terms of color, branding, whatnot. Then those sort of things, this and our mood boards kind of come together into some, either mid-fi or high fidelity screen designs that we do that cover some of the workflow. And then the last piece of it is we would put that stuff together into a basic working prototype, either using real code on the front end with like a CAN Node.js server, just serving up pages and some fake data, or we'll also do it just using Adobe XD and linking all the pages together, depending on how fast we're moving. And then the last, and then we throw that all together into Browser Stack and test it out on different browsers, devices, depending on what kind of app we're doing. And, and basically that, in terms of like, if you think of Agile, right? I mean, these then sort of fall into sprints. And another tool that we're really big into using too, I don't want to separate this second because I got a lot of like sensitive client stuff in there, but we use Airtable, if you're familiar with that, to do a lot of our planning. Airtable is like kind of a half database, half spreadsheet. And we use that to do, the equivalent of sprint planning, right? For putting our milestones together and for tracking what's done and for tracking, defects, requirement changes, whatnot, and all that. And all of these tools are pretty sweet because they all work well through Zoom, or they all work well with cloud sharing. Like XD now is great. You can even have two developers can be in completely different locations and working on the same cloud hosted document. Adobe's got that down pretty well. We can do the same thing with Zeppelin. We can do the same thing with Browser Stack, and same thing with Miro, and same thing with Airtable. So all of these tools have made it really nice. I mean, obviously collaboration works best when people are in the same room, in my opinion, but that doesn't mean it, can't work when people are separated.
Ken, this has been awesome. There's so much we covered and yet so much more to talk about. So we'll have to probably do a follow-up here at some point in time, but This is already running for over an hour. So I'm going to close this out here and ask and let you kind of close out by saying, where, if I am loving what I'm seeing here and I want to get in touch, how can I get in touch with you, Ken?
Yeah, well, just go to our website. I mean, that's probably the easiest way, KRUTSC. I always say Krutsch with a K, Krutsch.com. Well, it reflects to Krutsch.work, but whatever. Just go to Krutsch.com and, everything you need is there. We have a contact form, and we tell, we will give anyone, an hour of our time for free. We'll hear your idea and we'll tell you what we can do for you.
Awesome. Ken, thank you so much for your time and talking to us about UI and UX design. Hope to have you on the show again some other time.
Yeah, awesome, Paul. It was great. Appreciate it.
That's our show.